Welcome to this first workshop in a series. Um, we're following up the publication of the Double Empathy Reader with a series of workshops from authors of chapters from the reader. So gives people an opportunity to see some of this work presented live, as it were, and a taster of some of the content in the book. Um, so This is the first of the series, and we're seeking to hold another one in a couple of weeks' time. Should have some information on towards the end. Um, and that will also go up on the website soon, no doubt. And so um, this evening we have three presentations, starting off with myself and a chapter I wrote for the reader. Then we've got Paul Davies after that. Um, and then following a break, we have Nathan Keats. And so we have three presentations tonight. So hopefully a bit of a mixture, so something for everyone. And I'll just share my screen. Uh, so this is a bit of a promotion for the reader. So there's a fancy QR code for people wanting to find out more or make an order. So the reader has 33 chapters in all, so it's quite a weighty thing. I think it's £60, but so not the cheapest book, but then is quite a big one, so it's quite a weighty thing when you get it, and quite a lot of content there to explore. So, um, the chapter I wrote for the reader was regarding this fella here, one Irving Goffman, and it's entitled something aping a title of one of Irving Goffman's own books, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. So my chapter is called Revisiting Goffman, The Presentation of an Autistic Self in Everyday Life. And in developing the double empathy problem all those years ago as a theory, there was a range of theoretical influences that helped me sort of construct this concept. And one prominent amongst these was Irving Goffman, and particularly two of his seminal works from the 50s and 60s. Not only the presentation of self in everyday life, but also his book on stigma, Notes on the Management of a Spoiled Identity. And the reason also for revisiting Irving Goffman's work was in recent years, you've no doubt seen all the discussions around autistic masking. And quite often on things like social media, I'd see articles put up or discussions taking place. And often my response was to these discussions, can you please go away and read some Irving Goffman? And it dawned on me one day on one of these discussions that it'd been quite a few years since I'd read Irving Goffman myself, because it was something I'd read many years ago as a sociology student. So I thought it was about time I revisited these kind of seminal works. and they're linked with the double empathy problem. And that's where the chapter came from. So, in the presentation of self in everyday life, Goffman set out how, when a person comes into contact with another person, they will utilize their appearance and their manner, their behavior, if you like, as well as their setting that they were situated within, in order to manage the impressions that they were presenting. So they would manage impression management stuff, whilst their partner in the interaction will simultaneously be trying to obtain information about them to form an impression of them. And this is why Goffman made an analogy between the performances that people portray in everyday life with that of their theatrical performance. Like Shakespeare before him, we're all actors up on a stage kind of thing. And he called this the dramaturgical self. So he analyzes settings and performances, what he called front stage and backstage performance, as well as the personal front portrayed by individual social actors through their appearances and manner. As an example, one could take the role of a mental health professional, whose appearances and manner will follow certain expectations and scripts when performing on stage, say interacting with a patient, yet is likely to interact quite differently in so-called backstage with their colleagues in the staff room. And Goffman also talks about power relations between people in a fairly indirect way. It wasn't his main focus. But if we look at this passage here, it's quite an interesting one. We have then a kind of interactional modus vivendi. Together, the participants contribute to a single overall definition of the situation, which involves not so much a real agreement as to what exists, but rather a real agreement as to whose claims concerning what issues will be temporarily honoured. So in a sense, Goffman suggests that social interaction is a kind of dance almost, where particular interactors within the situation may assume a more powerful position and whose claims or definition of the situation may temporarily take hold. And Goffman also, though, was one of the first social scientists to really analyze what happens when we have breakdowns in social interaction. We analyzed it in such depth as a whole. And Goffman detailed how these dramatic performances, as it were, could be disrupted by unmeant gestures or faux pas. Interestingly, he described such events in terms of incidents, which force upon the audience an image of the man behind the mask. So whilst Goffman didn't use the term masking in a conceptual sense, but rather those of passing and concealment, he indeed used the phrase here in relation to performance and to disruptions of that performance, when the sort of mask slips, as it were. This passage here, out of all of Goffman's work, to me is potentially the most closest to actually talking about the double empathy problem. And to me, it's a sort of quite a lovely piece of text. Given the fact that the individual effectively projects a definition of the situation when he enters the presence of others, we can assume that events may occur within the interaction which contradict, discredit, or otherwise throw doubt upon this projection. When these disruptive events occur, the interaction itself may come to a confused and embarrassed halt. Some of the assumptions upon which the responses of the participants have been predicted become untenable, and the participants find themselves lodged in an interaction for which the situation has been wrongly defined is now no longer defined. At such moments, the individual whose presentation has become discredited may feel ashamed, while the others present may feel hostile, and all the participants may come to feel ill at ease, nonplussed, out of countenance, embarrassed, experiencing the kind of anomaly that is generated when the minute social system of face-to-face interaction breaks down. A lovely bit of text there, and quite rich, really, in its description of what's happening and some of the consequences of interactional breakdown when the social norms are not played in the way people expect. And this fed into his later work on social stigma, because Goffman explored impression management and how people conceal aspects of their social identities when those identities deviate from socially approved norms. And when not meeting the standards set by others, a person can feel disjuncture and shame, leading to concealment. So, in essence, masking. Goffman distinguishes in his analysis between what he calls a person's actual and virtual social identity, where a virtual identity is that created by constructs that others associate with the person, often created by assumptions and stereotypes. And a stigmatized person, therefore, has a social role to play that is defined by others with subsequent expectations, and that this has all kinds of negative consequences on the individual. Whilst a person's actual identity, when enacted, can also defy such expectations. But this also leads to social consequences, often negative again for the individual. So quite a problematic situation for someone to be in. So stigma not only occurs when a particular norm is unsupported, but also when a norm is not enacted, performed, and realized. So here we can see how social interaction is this mutually orchestrated performance or dance regarding the realization of social norms. And when these are breached or broken, then the consequences can vary greatly due to context, but are not likely to favour those in a position of a minoritized other, particularly those deemed deficient in the realm of social interaction and communication itself. So, impression management relating to stigma and masking is clearly not something confined just to the experiences of autistic people alone. And Goffman talked about it in all kinds of social interactions and encounters. But what can be said to be rather different are the reasons why someone may be concealing and masking aspects of their identity, and the consequences for them is if this is unsuccessful. So masking as a phenomenon is not specific to any one group of people, but the stigma associated with being autistic is rather more so. And an interesting area of Goffman's work related to the opposite of stigma, or areas where it was lessened sense. And in this quote, it kind of points in this direction. The area of stigma management, then, might be seen as something that pertains mainly to public life, contact between strangers or mere acquaintances, to one end of a continuum whose other pole is intimacy. In the above passage, Goffman contrasts stigma with the acceptance one might find in an intimate relationship. Now, obviously not all intimate relationships are good, pleasant, positive ones. But Goffman was talking about when that is the case, when you do have uh, a sense of acceptance, understanding, mutual reciprocity with others, empathy, if you like, on a deeper level. And thus, if there is a solution to the double empathy problem, it's in the building of relationships and rapport, mutual understanding through humility and shared respect. Finally, because we got limited time today, and it's be good to have a bit of discussion and Q&A around Goffman's work and so on. A bit of his work that I wanted to highlight today is what he called the whys, and he made this distinguish between these two ideas of the own and whys, with the own being those who embodied and enacted the stigmatized identity, and the whys being those who are privy to the secret life of the stigmatized, but who were sympathetic to their plight. In our contemporary parlance, one could call these allies. In revisiting Goffman, it should be noticeable that in the case of the stigmatized, and in this instance the case of autistic masking, one could be said that you're damned if you do and damned if you don't, discredited at every juncture, but sometimes finding solace in one's own culture and community and acceptance socially. And for those wishing to understand the presentation of autistic self in everyday life and the double empathy problem, those that see themselves as allies and for the cause of autistic people's well-being, then a word to the wise would be to follow up my suggestion of going and revisiting Goffman yourself and reading some of this work, because to me there's some issues with it. It is somewhat going back in many decades now, but his work really set a standard in terms of analysing qualitative data and theorising from it. And those ideas around social interaction helped a lot of the theorising that led on to the double empathy problem as a concept. There's some references. Any questions?
Thank you, Damian. Please feel free either to raise a hand or use chat. And I would just echo what Damian has just said as somebody who has recently gone back and revisited Goffman and then gone through to some of the later work around framing. Yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. It is of its time, and I think if you take the language into account in terms of that, it's still, I think, as insightful as it was. So I think. Any questions, comments? Okay, so we've definitely there's definitely a difference between code switching and masking. From Joe. And if you want to comment or yeah.
I mean, I guess switching codes, although some people are far more agile at this than others, this is something people do in real time almost, and switch back and forth. So there's an episode of Blackadder that was done years ago, which shows this kind of both code switching and an element of masking at the same time. Um, and he's got in one room of the house a visiting cleric from the church. And in another room of the house, he's got a sort of drunken party going on with people getting more and more drunk. And he's going from one room to the other and putting on the performance of what's expected. And then as the evening continues, of course, he starts getting drunk himself and walks in to talk to the cleric with sort of some fake boobs around his neck or something. And it all sort of hell breaks loose. But this kind of um, switching codes in different social contexts happens quite a lot, and different languages or that are specific almost to certain roles or organizations. I remember the first meeting I ever had with sort of NAS types and things many years ago. And there was one person there who I could hardly understand anything they said, because in every sentence there was at least one or two acronyms being used. And these are all over the place in the autism world. And in my first ever meeting, I was like, what? What? What are you talking about? And so certain social expectations can, in language and in interaction, can become kind of siloed off into the little echo chambers and so on. But with masking, there is, at least in Goffman's concepts of passing and concealment, there is a strong element of concealing aspects of one's social identity which might break with others' expectations of you. And so there's different ways people could interact, depending on whether they had a discredited identity already in the eyes of others, or one which was discreditable, as Goffman said it. And this had different impacts on the way people interact.
I've got a question, just lost it for a second, from Stephanie. Um, I've used a lot of citations for double empathy in my thesis, both in terms of autistic parents' experiences of raising children and experiences of mental distress in autistic university students. Although very different populations, both seem to have significant difficulties stemming down from double empathy problems. I know we're discussing masking and double empathy, but do you feel that the double empathy problem also is situated in different styles of communication across neurotypes?
Oh, yeah. And I first came up with the phrase trying to explain this problem to parents at a parent group. And so when my son was sort of, must have been 4 or 5 years old, I used to go to a kind of parent group meetup for parents with autistic children, sort of coffee morning thing. And many of these parents were struggling with understanding why their children were doing things the way they were, why their children were struggling with various stuff or getting upset, things like this. And so I was using the phrase then. And especially for parents with newly diagnosed young children, it's quite a kind of whirlwind experience where a lot of social expectations are broken, kind of thing. A lot of build up and all these ideas in one's head. And sometimes they can not meet with reality kind of thing. And so there is often a bit of a double empathy problem as the parent starts to try and understand these autistic ways of being. But often that uh, improves a lot with time, I would say, and experience. Um, and even when a parent doesn't intuitively connect that well, they can kind of figure it out if they put that effort in over time. And similarly with professionals and so on, and whether at university or mental health, so on, it takes that rapport building over time to break down kind of interactive barriers or misunderstanding. So to me, the double empathy problems most likely to happen with complete strangers, um, and people one's just met or on social media. Like, I've often called Twitter a kind of double empathy problem escalator. It's sort of designed to set people off against one another and misinterpret each other.
There's a comment from which I think sort of, goes to the damned if you do and damned if you don't. So I think I can see what Goffman means. My main problem always seems to be twofold: when I fail to follow social norms, and then when I fail to copy social norms properly. So I've got a faulty mask. Really powerful way
Yeah,
of putting
that's
it.
part of the problem is, I think, and why autistic people are often picked upon, often in secondary school and late primary can often be a problem because you start um, looking odd in a sense to people's expectations, and then oddity is policed in a way because people are fearful of being caught out themselves. So everyone's putting on a front and a mask and don't want to be caught out in a sense. But some people are better at putting on the performance than others, or are not quite as exhausted by it, or even enjoy it. I think I can't say I do. um, and to me, for example, in the way I come across to other people, I'm not the greatest performer of roles and expectations. Um, but then there is a level of concealment. So there's certain things one might not act out in front of other people because one doesn't want to get in trouble or that kind of thing. And I think there's a level um, going different in different social contexts, but in many ways, I would say in a more a kind of simple generalistic way that men in many respects can get away with certain faux pas socially or not putting the effort in. So what I think what something I picked up many years ago as a kind of autistic man was somewhat getting away with that lack of effort. So always a bit of a slacker, bit of a hippie. You can kind of get away with it in by sort of falling into another somewhat accepted social role. When you're a woman, say socially, and you don't put much effort in to your performance, your appearance, and your manners, you're going to get policed quite strongly for that quite quickly, and by other women as well. And so it's there's a gendered nature to masking for sure, and because of the gendered nature of social expectation. Don't know where I how I got on that tangent, but it's part of it.
Thank you, Damien. I'm not sure this one. Oh, yes, Tracy, 100% agreed. Let's see. So masking people sometimes discuss internalizing the mask, or at least the neuro norms that the mask represents. Does Goffman's work shed much light on these sorts of experiences?
Um, Somewhat. I mean, he was more interested in the sort of dance of social interaction and the performance side of it than the internal experience, in a sense. Um, but he was one of the sort of early social scientists to really take that in-depth interest in social interaction itself. I mean, there were others that are very much worth looking into as well. I'm thinking of writing a book about them all, in a way, all these different theorists that influenced me, my theory. So, a bit of a theory, but just,
And we have a question from Catherine.
Um, so, with interactions with people, to sort of reduce this as a barrier, do you think sort of giving people the lead, like so I work with people with sort of severe learning disabilities, autistic people with severe learning disabilities, sort of giving people the lead, making sure that someone is comfortable would be a good start to, not going in with a pre-idea about how I expect the person to.
put all assumptions to one side. It's like, because my humility to me is the key word, because you never quite know what to expect or what someone's going to say in their own way or however
Yeah,
they communicate. And so it's take their lead and but be responsive.
yeah,
So I think that's something that comes out of things like intensive interaction and Phoebe Caldwell and things, is that when someone's making some kind of approach to you, is to respond to that in a similar, not in mimic, but
yeah,
sort of a dialogue, and to take note of that and potential meanings, because at first you might not have any idea what someone means by what they're doing or trying to get across, but in time you will.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
um, my son uses very few words usually, but he certainly gets his point across when he wants to, and you kind of learn his rhythms and his language in a way. Right? There's a Mel Baggs that in my language, there's that kind of
yeah.
learning what that person means by what they're doing. That might not use words at all.
That's it, and not expecting a norm, if you know what I mean, or a social. I mean, just
Oh,
not
that way.
just. I mean, just yeah, yeah. I remember recognizing a psychologist by the way they held a clipboard, and it was just a kind of aura about
Yeah.
that type of thing, sort of trying to avoid.
Yeah, there's people you can recognize quite far away, or like they have a certain voice that carries across the room, or just a presence like, walking in the room. It's like, oh, you just sort of feel this vibe, I think.
Yeah,
And so there's all kinds of ways you can recognize uh, and respond. So it's all the non-verbal side of it's all even more interesting in a way than the verbal side. I've kind of running out of time and should be
Yeah,
passing over to Paul.
yeah. I think if we, because I know there are a couple of comments still, but we should have time, I think, at the end
I'll have a read in the chat.
and you can have a read of the chat as well too. So thank you so much, Damian. And I think making those links between masking and Goffman, which aren't always evident in papers that we see, and also encouraging us all to go back and read Goffman it's never a bad thing. So thank you for that.